And also there's this view that people have. I've just, we're on freeform Bitcoin jazz land at the moment, so hopefully this will make some sense. The value of Bitcoin remains invisible, I think, for a lot of people who can afford to have accountants. Well, lots of people in the world can't afford to have accountants. Throw them a bone or two because you've got public ledgers with Bitcoins for free. Bitcoin's value remains invisible to people who always pay above the table. I was just reading, I did a show on the on Ukraine recently, not the Ukraine. I know I got it corrected so many times on Ukraine, and 40% of their economy is gray market because people simply can't survive in the maze of regulations and corruption and legislation and regulatory capture and special interest groups and complex laws and taxes. They can't survive. And so a method, and between a quarter, a third, depending on how you measure it, up to 40% of the world's economy is outside of the reach of legality. That does not mean illegal. It just means that they don't have access to any kind of legal dispute system. The dispute system that's baked into the Bitcoin architecture, like, let's throw them a bone. That, just because you and I can afford accountants doesn't mean that there's not, hundreds of millions of people around the world who are going to hugely benefit from this, even though it's, part of what we would call the cost of doing business. Boy, if it can go way down, how great is that for the third world? How great is that for entrepreneurs in Somalia? How great is that for, women who want to start a sewing collective in Dubai? I mean, God, the value of it is not necessarily from where everyone is standing in the privileged Western, often white world. There's a whole world out there of people who need these transactions and these public ledgers and these abilities. And if you don't see that, there's something where people are just looking in a mirror saying, well, that's the whole world, right?
Well, that's the key point, and I think that bears emphasizing even more. It's something I've been talking about for
You mean
more than a
louder?
year
Just
now.
do it again, but louder? Is that? No, sorry, go
Well, slightly different. Let's look at it from this perspective. Right now, if you look at the world and split it into banked and unbanked, you really miss the picture. So, for example, the World Bank says that there are approximately 2.5 billion unbanked people. What they're counting is employment age adults who have no access to banking facilities. That is a very narrow perspective of what it means to be unbanked. Let me look at it from a different perspective, and this is the way I like to look at it. Approximately 1 billion people in the world have the type of banking facilities that we take for granted among the upper echelons of the middle class and upper middle class in the United States. These are banking facilities that have high liquidity, that have broad availability to credit instruments, that allow you to source credit from a variety of providers, that allow you to transmit money not just nationally but also internationally with very few and quite liberal currency controls, that allow you to own and transact in multiple currencies, that allow you to access stock markets and invest, that allow you to raise capital. All of these facilities are facilities that about 60% of the US population and about 60% of Western Europe's population have at their fingertips. And of course, the richest layer of people in the world. About 1 billion people have fully enabled, internationally capable, very liquid, high credit banking facilities. Then there's the other 6 billion. And if you take a moment to look at the other 6 billion and you count the underbanked, those who are banked but have no access to credit facilities, who have checking accounts but no ability to transfer international funds, and therefore have no ability to outsource their services to other countries, who have credit facilities and banking but no ability to invest on a stock market or a very limited stock market in their own company or their own country, so they can't invest internationally. And then you add to that the underbanked, the itinerants, the migrants, the people who work in completely cash-based societies, all the way down to the people who lack basic electricity and capabilities, basic food, sanitation, shelter, electricity, who are obviously completely unbanked in cash-based societies. That's 6 billion people. Now, here's the magic thing about that. About 1.5 billion of these people who have very limited banking facilities are already on the internet, and we can onboard them to Bitcoin, either with a download of an application onto a desktop or smartphone, or perhaps even using simple feature phones and text messaging gateways into Bitcoin. We can take a
Hmm.
billion and a half people and bring them online to an international class, cross-border, full credit economy, which will empower them economically to a level we have never before seen in the history of humanity. That's what excites me about Bitcoin. And you could fail 1,000 goxes, and it wouldn't put a dent in the possibility that that type of solution brings to people who are desperately hungry for these types of capabilities because they have productive potential, but they are on an economic island cut off from the rest of the world. If a shopkeeper in Kenya can use a feature phone and SMS to source a loan from 20,000 Bitcoin people around the world, each of whom is paying a fraction, maybe 10 pennies, and source a loan that allows that shopkeeper to build inventory for their store, this is not shopping for them. This is not a fad. This is not a speculative investment. This is a life-changing opportunity that will uplift the entire community around them and will improve their water and their sanitation and their healthcare and their education and the next generation of their children. I mean, this is really groundbreaking stuff. It's world-changing stuff. So we're not going to let Gox stop us from bringing that vision to people.
Well, and oh man, they're not laying copper phone wires in Somalia because it's wireless. It's all cell phone technology. You wouldn't
Right.
build 90% of the crap that we have was just all first and second generation nonsense, which frankly should just be thrown away, except we use it because it's there. When
Yeah.
you can teleport, you don't build roads. And can you imagine growing an economy from subsistence level to middle classdom without a banking sector of any fundamental size, without the financial predators that roam the corridors of power and the market ways of the world constantly, like the whole microloan foundation or the whole microloan phenomenon, which has turned into a stranglehold on the poor with massive debt and so on. It just gets taken over by the sociopaths. All the great stuff in the world gets taken over. This decentralized model can't be. But isn't it amazing to think that we can take an economy from subsistence to middle class without growing this white collar bunch of predators and banksters? And they could just bypass that whole thing. I mean, we're going to have to shred ours, so we're going to completely unable to compete. Yay!
Right. They leapfrog the entire system. They bypass central fiat banking with currency issuance from corrupt central banks that use inflation to steal money in the form of hidden taxation. And they bypass that as if it's a car accident that they rubberneck and look at it in horror and fascination at this failed experiment of the last 100 years in Western society. And they look at that and think, well, thank God we skipped that one. And we could go directly to a decentralized global currency that empowered individuals and gave them full control over their finances. And if you look at some places in Africa, for example, we've seen this experiment already succeed, not with Bitcoin, but with examples that have very close parallels. With cell phones, for example, they bypass landlines, and you see these like 1 square foot solar panels distributed around various places in Africa, in places where they have no electricity in the home, they have no plumbing, and maybe they're providing heat and cooking capability by burning wood, but there's a solar panel on the roof, and that solar panel is used for one purpose only: to run a little radio and to charge a feature phone, and that feature phone is their connection to the rest of the world. Now, if you can turn that feature phone into a fully enabled international wire transfer and checking account combination, that is an incredibly powerful technology. We saw what happens when you give people the ability to have a currency that is incredibly fungible. We saw it in Kenya, where a system that was originally developed to allow family members to exchange cell phone minutes. I can imagine the day that one person went into a store and said, look, I don't have any money, but I have 2 minutes left on my cell phone. Can I give you 2 minutes for 6 eggs? And boom, a currency was born. And less than 12 years later, the currency called M-Pesa now represents 40% of the GDP of Kenya. 40% without anybody planning to turn that into a currency. We know this can happen. When you combine the capability and utility of very fluid money, frictionless commerce, with feature phones that can be affordable for anyone. I mean, for 10 euros, you can buy yourself a seat at the international economy. People will do that. And instantly overnight, you will see this explosion of economic activity, and you can bring online the productive capacity of 2/3 of the planet that have never had the opportunity to interact, not only to interact with us, but to interact with each other.